Hey you guys, it's me Shania and I'm back again with another video. Shania. If you're new to this channel, my name is Shania, and on this channel I have loads of sewing tutorials. Some of the tutorials are from things that I've made from scratch, from fabric to finish, and some of the tutorials are of garments that I've upcycled and refashioned. So check it out. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you 5 different ways that you can make a ruffle or gather fabric like in general. And this is so important because when you know how to make a ruffle or how to gather fabric, like design possibilities are pretty much endless because there's so many different designs that you can do when you have ruffles. Using one of the methods that I'm going to show you, I actually made this top. So if you notice, there's like a ruffle at the top and something like a ruffle at the bottom. And it's so cute. I love it so much. And I actually have a tutorial for this video, so just check the link down below in the description. The 5 different ways that I'm going to show you are 1, a double row stitch. The second way is the gathering foot. The third way is through elastic. The fourth way is through like a drawstring kind of casing kind of method. The fifth and final way is through hand stitching. So if you're excited and you're ready to see these ways of how you can make a ruffle or gather fabric in general, stick around, grab your wine, grab your drink, and let's get into it. Ciao. All right, so method 1. Well, actually, before you make a ruffle, you always want to make sure that your fabric is about at least double the width of whatever it is that you're trying to make a ruffle for. So in this case, I'm trying to make a ruffle for my wrist. So my fabric has to be double the measurement of my wrist. In this method, you want to make sure that your thread tails are super long because we're going to be using those later on to help us create our ruffle. And here I'm just lining up my needle along the serged edge, and I'm just doing a basic straight stitch. As you saw, I didn't backstitch at all. Just hop on and stitch away, and then I'm not backstitching when I'm done. And again, I'm pulling my thread so that I have a really long thread tail. And then snip away, and it should look something like this. Just a simple straight stitch, nothing special. And then you're basically just gonna do the same thing again underneath that stitch. I like to do it about, I wanna say, I think it's like 1/4 of an inch or a 1/2 inch distance apart. I just kind of line up the edge of my presser foot to the first row of stitches and then just bring down my needle and then do a straight stitch. Again, remember to keep your thread tails long, and then just stitch all the way to the bottom. Remember, you're not back stitching at all, not at the start and not at the finish, and keep the thread tails long at the end. And then you want to snip away. So when you're done, your 2 rows should look something like this. And in theory, you really only need 1 row, but the reason why we do 2 rows is just in case the thread breaks in the first row, then you kind of have the second row as like a backup. So take one of these rows. I like to use the top row, and you only need to really work with one of the threads. So obviously you have 2 pieces of thread. You have your top thread and then your thread from your bobbin. So just choose one of them. I like to choose the top thread. Jeez Louise, I'm like tongue-tied. I like to choose the top thread, and then basically all you have to do is just kind of like pull the fabric down along the thread. So just hold on to the thread with one hand and then continue to just kind of pull the fabric while you're holding the thread taut. And then once you do that, it'll start to gather the fabric like this. And sometimes the fabric might get stuck, so you just have to make sure that you're, very gentle, very delicate, and then if you need to, you can kind of stop and just wherever the ruffle is like bunched up, then you can kind of start like pulling from that gathered area, start pulling it down, and then work your way back up to the top of the fabric, and then again repeat that sort of action of just pulling the fabric down along the thread. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, leave me a comment and let me know. So eventually when you keep doing this, you'll eventually gather all of your fabric and you'll have a full ruffle. Personally, this is not my favorite method because it just takes forever, and I hate the fact that the thread is so delicate, so there's the fear of like breaking the thread and then having to use the second row. And if you're dealing with like a really long strip of fabric, it could really actually take forever, and nobody has time for that. No one at all. So moving on to method 2, the gathering foot. This is the gathering foot that I got from Amazon. The link for this is down below in the description box. And if you can see, this is what it looks like. There's a little groove here that allows you to basically attach one piece of fabric that you're ruffling to another piece of fabric. So I'm basically just going to install the foot, and I'm using my handy dandy screwdriver-ish kind of thing to unscrew my current presser foot. And then in order to put my ruffle foot in, you just want to look for the side that has like the groove. So one side is flat and then the other side has like a sort of like indenture. And you're going to want to put the side that has the indenture, that's the side that needs to go like underneath the screw. And just make sure that your screw is loose enough so that you can just kind of slide the foot right up. And once you've done that, then you just want to screw it tight so that your foot doesn't come out. And when you're done, it should look something like this. So you want to thread your needle the same exact way that you would with your regular presser foot. The only difference is you want to make sure that your top thread goes through that hole of the gathering foot. I know my camera's a little out of focus, but I'm basically just taking the thread and pushing it through the hole so that both threads are underneath the foot. And now you want to take your fabric, again, making sure that your fabric is at least double the amount of whatever it is that you're making the ruffle for. And in this case, because my fabric is already serged, I'm going to line up the edge of the serged part to the edge of my presser foot. And then I'm going to move my needle over all the way to the far right so that when the needle comes down, it will end up right where the edge of the serging is. And the reason why I did that is because my machine was having a little bit of trouble with the serge edge going directly under the foot. I think it might have been too much friction. So you might not have to do that, but in case you have an issue, you should try what I did. And then you're just gonna stitch naturally, and it will gather the fabric on its own, so you don't even have to really like do anything. And when you're done, it should look something like this. I love it. Super, super easy. All right, moving on to method 3, the elastic method. So you are first going to take your elastic and you're going to measure whatever it is that you're making the ruffle for. So in my case, it's my wrist. You want to make sure that you do not stretch the elastic when you're measuring whatever area you need the ruffle for. So you see here, it fits perfectly without stretching. Now you're going to take your fabric again, which should be double the amount of your actual like finished ruffle, and you want to just divide the elastic in half and divide the fabric in half and use a pin to mark the halfway points. So in order to find the halfway points, you take the elastic, you fold it in half, you take a pin and you place a pin right along the crease of the fold because that represents the halfway point. And you're gonna do the same thing with the fabric. So you're gonna take the fabric, you're gonna fold the fabric in half, and then you're gonna take a pin, and then you're going to put a pin right along the crease of the fold because that, my friend, is the halfway point. So now what you want to do is you want to take your elastic and you want to put it on top of your fabric, and you want to line up the midway point of the elastic with the midway point of the fabric. You see what I did there? Smart, right? And it's up to you where you want to put your elastic. For the case of this example, I'm just putting it right like at the edge of my fabric, but if you wanted to, you could put it underneath the serged area so that you could fold it over to create like a casing or something like that. Anyhow, once you've done that, you're going to just pin each edge of the elastic to its corresponding edge of the fabric, like so. Now for this top edge, this is where I'm going to be starting, so I just pinned it like about 1 inch away from the top, because not the top, but like from the side, because I want to be able to like put my needle down and sew. And then you just want to pin the other end of the elastic to the other edge of the fabric. Okay, so when you're done pinning, it should look something like this. And you're basically also going to be using these pins as a sort of like spot for when you're pulling your fabric. You can just hold on to the pins and just lightly pull your fabric while you're gathering. I'll show you what I mean in the next clip. Okay, so now you want to bring your fabric over to your machine, and I like to start with a kind of long thread tail because I'm going to be using the thread tail to guide my fabric through the machine. So you're going to drop your presser foot, making sure that your elastic is right kind of like in the middle, and then you're going to use these machine settings, and you're going to drop your needle, and then you're just going to hold on to your thread tail and lightly pull on the thread tail while you are stretching your fabric. So hold on to those pins. Remember, I told you that before. Hold on to them and lightly pull both layers as you pull the thread tail, and you just sew. And you just want to take your time and make sure that your elastic stays lined up. Just continue doing that until you get to your pins. Make sure that you leave your needle down, and then you want to take out those 2 pins, and then drop your presser foot again and continue lightly pulling on the layers while you sew. I also use this method for gathering with elastic in my ruffle waist gingham skirt tutorial, so check it out. Okay, moving on to method 4, which is the casing / drawstring method. So I have my fabric that's going to be gathered, and then I have a strip of fabric where my drawstring is going to go. And you can place this strip of fabric wherever you want the drawstring part to be. So it could be the top, the middle, or the bottom. And you're just going to pin the strip of fabric down onto your fabric, and I'm pinning it in the middle since I'm going to be sewing along the top edge and the bottom edge. And you also want to make sure that your sewing leaves enough space for the string to go through the 2 rows of sewing. Okay, so now you want to sew down your casing fabric onto your regular fabric, and you're just using a regular straight stitch. And these are the machine settings for this stitch. So when you're done sewing, it should look something like this. You have 2 neat little rows. Now you can see that my rows are super far apart, which means that whatever string I used has to be big enough to fit snugly between these 2 rows. So for the case of this example, I'm just going to use some yarn to thread through the casing, but ideally you should use like a fabric drawstring that you made, which would be much larger than yarn. So anyway, I'm going to use the safety pin method in order to get this yarn inside of the casing. So you basically just take a safety pin and you attach it to one end of the yarn, and then you take the head of the safety pin and you feed it through the casing. So by the casing, I mean you feed it in between those 2 rows of stitching. So in this case, it'd be a lot easier since the 2 rows are pretty far apart, but sometimes it can be tricky if your row is a little bit thinner. When you finish threading the yarn or the string through the casing, it'll look something like this. And basically, to activate the ruffle, you would basically just kind of gather or scrunch the fabric down along the string so that it forms like a ruffle. Using this method really depends on what you're making. Like if you're making like a bag, a drawstring bag, or like a dress or something that has like the gathering effect, I recommend this method. All right, the final method is the hand stitch method. Now, in order to do this, you're going to take your fabric and you're going to need needle and thread, and the thread should be longer than the fabric that you're working with. And you are going to thread your needle, ooh, there goes my phone, thread your needle and knot it at the end. And then starting with your needle under the fabric, you are going to poke your needle up to the top of the fabric, bring up the thread, and then poke your needle on the top of the fabric and bring it underneath the fabric. And then instead of pulling it all the way through, you're going to take your needle and poke it back up to the top. And then you're literally just going to zigzag your fabric back and forth on the needle, and then you're going to pull the needle and you'll see that you created a stitch. So that's kind of like a fast way to do it. But you can see that this stitch is pretty big, so to make it smaller, what you want to do is you want to do the same thing, but this time you want to have less of the needle sticking out, because that way it'll make the stitch smaller when you zigzag your fabric on the needle. So you see here it's like less of the needle sticking out, and then you just zigzag your fabric and then you would pull your needle. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, just leave me a comment and let me know. Repeat this step until you get all the way to the end of your fabric, and when you're done, you should have stitches that look sort of like this. So in order to create your ruffle with these stitches, what you want to do is you want to just hold your end of the thread tail. You want to hold on to it, and then you're literally just going to use your other hand to slide the fabric down the other end of the thread. And when you slide it down, you'll see that the fabric will start to gather, and that's how you create a ruffle by using a hand stitch. Now this way is okay if you have a small piece of fabric, but if you're working with something like a skirt or a dress or something, I don't recommend this way. Okay, so I want to know which of these 5 methods you're actually going to give a try, because this is a lot of information and you have a lot of different possibilities. So let me know which one stood out to you the most. And if you want to see more tutorials that are related to like designs that have ruffles and incorporate the methods that I mentioned in this video, you should check out my tutorial for this top. You should check out my tutorial for the high waist, ruffle waist gingham skirt, and the tutorial that I made. It's a tiered maxi skirt with ruffles. So check them out. The links for those are down below in the description. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. See you guys in the next one. Ciao.